Let me see.
Hold on, let me do.
They're not getting you. They said they heard me. Oh, wait, somebody says it's okay. It's back on, maybe?
Can everybody hear me now? If so, chat in.
Yes, I'm seeing yes, yes, yes in the question menu. Thank you all. Yeah, I think our audio's back on. I have no idea what happened, but here we go.
No problem. Well, thank you guys for bearing with me. I'll just start over because I'm not sure where I lost you. My name is Patrick Westerlund. I'm excited to be here today and get to spend a little bit of time with you guys talking about social impact investing. Maybe a term that's unfamiliar to many of you, and if so, that's a great opportunity for me to share the magnitude of what this could mean for your organizations and the causes that you care about. Many of you are probably familiar with this slide. This is taken right from Giving USA out of the Lilly School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. This is showing 2014 numbers. You can see total giving in 2014 was around $360 billion. Where we're going to focus is on that segment in red, the foundation piece. It's 15% of total giving coming from foundations, so it's a smaller segment of the pie, but by no means is it a small amount of money. $54 billion given by foundations in 2014. The interesting thing and where we're going to focus our conversation is around the total assets of the foundation. So foundations nationally have total assets of around $800 billion. So the question is, if they're giving $54 billion, what are they doing with the rest? Well, typical private family foundations operate with an endowment model. It may not surprise you to know that the IRS requires foundations to distribute 5% of their assets every year to nonprofits in the community. Typically, what happens with the other 95% then is that it's invested into stocks and bonds. So the grants disappear, right? It's a one-way street. We distribute them, and they never return to the foundation. The rest of the money we invest in the stock market. Our goal is, of course, to grow the endowment to replace the 5% that we give away. If you look at the size of the payouts, the grants, again, is $54 billion in 2014, and that endowment is $750 billion. Just imagine the possibilities if nonprofits could find a way to access that $750 billion. What if I told you they can't? And that's where social impact investing comes into play. So before we go on, I'd like to ask Christy for her help. I want to do 2 quick poll questions to understand your background knowledge on these subjects before we move forward. So Christy, if you could help with that, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, there's poll number 1. If you all are at your computer screens, you can make your selection there by clicking yes, no, or not sure. I'll watch the results populate. Great. One more second, and I will close the poll here in a second. Yeah, you can see it on your screen, right?
Yeah.
When I close it, all right, we're at 80% voted. I'm going to close the poll. And what we have is 24% of you said yes, you have. 57% said no, and 19% said you're not sure.
Yeah, so this is really interesting. And after we finish the second poll, I'll show you the results of a survey that we did a couple years ago on the nonprofit sector. This is right in line with about what we found a couple years ago. Most nonprofits think of foundations as grant makers. And in fact, you know, foundation by foundation, there can be a lot of differences between us, but there's also a lot of opportunity to build a closer relationship with a foundation that goes beyond just grants. Impact investing, today's conversation, is one of those ways. So, Christy, let's open number 2.
Yep, You should see number 2 on your screen. Same drill. Has your organization ever taken on debt or a loan to further your mission? Great. We're at 81%. I'm going to close the poll.
Good.
And we have 29% have taken on debt, 53% have not, and 18% are not sure.
Yeah. So I'm going to click to the next slide. So this is the survey that we did through the Ohio Association of Nonprofit Organizations in 2013. You know, if you look at the very last one there, has your organization ever pursued any types of financing or investment from a foundation? In 2013, we found that only 6% of nonprofits had ever considered financing from a foundation. There's a larger percentage that have considered taking on loans, using financing. It's interesting because we use financing in our personal lives all the time, to buy cars, to buy homes, some people to go to school, or to just manage day-to-day spending with a credit card. So it's sometimes very surprising to learn that a very small minority of nonprofits consider financing as part of their strategy, usually because it's viewed as taking on a liability, right? As soon as you borrow something that's maybe perceived negatively on your balance sheet or your annual filing. But hopefully through the course of this conversation today, through a number of examples that I'll share with you, you'll maybe shift that perspective and gain a greater understanding of how you can use financing responsibly, of course, but to fuel your mission and expand the impact that your organization can have. Currently, there is more money available for impact investing than there are requests to use it. Said a little bit differently, foundations that have set aside money for impact investing are having trouble finding nonprofits who are able and interested in taking advantage of those dollars. A little bit different than grants, right? So we're talking about dollars that are borrowed and repaid. A simple example would be a loan. But there is an extraordinary amount of funding available for impact investing if you understand the language, how to use it, and that foundations offer it to begin with. A couple weeks ago, I was at an impact investing conference, the largest one in the country. It's put on by Mission Investors Exchange. There were over 500 foundation impact investors there. And we did a poll across the room, and we said, okay, how much money have we set aside for impact investing? And just by show of hands, it was clear that there was at least $3 billion that have been set aside across the country for impact investing. And we said, okay, next question, how many people have deployed all that they've set aside? And almost all of the hands went down. That's the opportunity that's available to nonprofits and arts organizations like you. So another thing to think about here before we really get into definition of impact investing and some examples is that same chart from before, total giving in 2014. Remember, there was almost $60 billion given to philanthropic causes in 2014. This social impact investing field, it's been around technically since 1969. It's really been catalyzed by the most recent financial recession. And it is projected to grow over the next 10 years anywhere between $400 billion and $1 trillion. So if you think about that, total giving tends to grow by a few percentage points every year. You could make the case that it might grow with the economy or inflation, but it's a relatively small growth rate. Impact investing is booming, growing at 20, 30, 40% per year, and it's going to make the difference between organizations that are only willing to consider total giving dollars, contributed support, versus those that adapt and learn how to use impact investing to complement fundraising activities and grow their organization even more, maybe even faster. So most foundations, if you look across the country, they do follow that traditional grant-making model that I shared earlier. They distribute 5% of their assets, they invest the rest in an endowment. We ourselves as a foundation had no idea that we could do impact investing when the foundation was formed in 2001. We're a small family foundation. The founders of our foundation, Tony and Dana, are very actively involved in the day-to-day. I was actually the first hired staff, and I didn't join until 2013. So they're very hands-on, very involved with the foundation. It was really an extension of them, their commitment to the community that fueled the activities of the foundation. But back in 2005, Tony Wells, the founder, was on the board of Easter Seals. He had recently joined, and Easter Seals at the time I think was around a $1.5 million nonprofit here in Columbus. So as part of being on the board and serving on the finance committee, he asked the question, what are we paying in interest on our $500,000 line of credit? It was fully drawn. So just like a credit card, if you have a little bit of money on your credit card one month to the next, you pay a small amount of interest. If you have a lot of money and you've reached your credit limit, you pay a lot more month to month in interest. Well, they had completely drawn down the $500,000, so they were paying a lot of money every month just in interest. So Tony asked the question, what are we paying on that? And the answer was 8.5%. He felt like that was a crime. So a typical foundation would maybe approach that situation and say, okay, here's an organization that I care about, that I give to, that's struggling from a financial standpoint just to stay good on its commitment with this loan. How can I help them solve that problem? Well, option one with traditional thinking would be, well, how about I give them a grant? Well, the challenge with that is you're going to have to give that grant every year in order to overcome that burden. In addition, it doesn't really feel that great or seem that efficient to give money to a nonprofit just to give it to the bank, not even to pay down the loan, but just to pay the interest of that loan. So he talked to his wife and he said, hey, honey, maybe there's another way that we can help them solve this problem. Maybe we can replace that loan. I've never heard of a foundation doing that, but maybe we could. And they looked it up and they realized that's called social impact investing, that foundations can do that. And while treasuries at the time were about 4.5%, they said, well, we're taking a little bit more risk if we invest in a nonprofit using a loan versus buying a treasury and having a guaranteed return. So why don't we charge a little bit more than treasuries to compensate for that higher risk, but make sure that we're reducing the interest rate in a significant level to help Easter Seals through this issue. So they ended up replacing it at 5.5%. So the difference between 5.5% and 8.5% is 3%. Well, 3% interest savings on a $500,000 loan is over $15,000 a year. Well, every year that loan is in place, the Wells Foundation was helping Easter Seals save another $15,000. So if it's a couple years, it adds up very quickly. What was most exciting about learning through this this loan for us was that by using our endowment and saying, instead of investing in a treasury, why don't we instead offer a loan directly to a nonprofit in our local community that we care about? We were able to solve their problem using our endowment at 95%, while keeping our 5% and using that for programs and other things that really can only be solved or funded using contributed support and grants. So all of a sudden, we were able to bring more resources to the table than a typical grant allocation would have allowed. So that expands our impact in the community, and it allows us to help more nonprofits expand their impact in the community. So it's probably time for me to tell you what impact investing actually is. And put very, very simply, impact investing is this idea of investing with the intention to create social or environmental impact while generating a modest financial return. Depending on how a foundation puts the investment on the books, in some cases it has to actually be below market rate, meaning cheaper than any banks or other lenders. Sometimes it's at market rate. I'll share an example of both here in just a moment. But at its core, Impact investing is really driven by the same social or environmental goals that a foundation has, and it just happens to be a new tool in the toolbox that we can use in addition to our grant making. And here you see financial return the foundation seeks can range from below market to market rate. The below market rate is called a PRI, or a program-related investment. That's what a lot of nonprofits are asking for and excited about, because regardless of any other benefits of working with a foundation, it's a lower cost source of funding for them. Typically, foundations are motivated by the social impacts first. If you're talking with a foundation, after this webinar, maybe you have a funder or a donor or a board member that you might approach and talk to about impact investing. Unlike a bank who is going to ask for the business plan and ultimately wants to know how they're going to get paid back, the conversation with a foundation, while it's still going to address that, that's really on the back end. What we want to talk to you about is the potential impact of the idea or the investment opportunity. If we give you this line of credit, how's it going to help you help the community more than you could without this investment? The last thing there, social impact investing as a concept or an idea is spreading really, really quickly in the foundation world, and it's completely changing the way that we operate. So I want to show you again this endowment model. So in this scenario, only 5% of our assets are actually going towards our mission, and that's being done through grants. The other 95%, you can see there in this made-up example, is invested in the stock market, treasuries, bonds, things like that, with an average return of about 6%. Under this model, our impact is that we can support 10 nonprofits who help maybe 1,000 kids. Here's where it gets exciting. If our foundation set a goal and we said we want to make sure that half of our assets are aligned with our mission, we're still going to give away 5% of our assets as grants each year, but instead of stocks and bonds, we want to make sure that at least 45% of our endowment is being invested into causes that align with our mission, loans to nonprofits, funding for social enterprises to get started. If you do that, step back for a moment and you see that 50% of our assets are now aligned with our mission, which means we went from 5% to 50%. We can help 100 nonprofits who help 10,000 kids, which is 10 times the impact that we were achieving under the traditional endowment model. Furthermore, for the math people out there, if our endowment is invested at 6% and our average interest rate for impact investing, maybe loans to nonprofits, is 4%, then our overall financial return is now a blend of 6 and 4, so it comes out to be around 5%. That means that we took a 1% reduction in the financial return that we received on our investments, but we were able to magnify our impact by 10 times. This is a really, really compelling idea. Our foundation is sort of on the bleeding edge. As a smaller foundation, we have a little bit more flexibility, and we said, you know what, let's set a really high goal. Let's try to move towards 100% mission alignment. So in our case, we distribute our grants typically to organizations that are close to the founders of the foundation, and then the other 95% of assets are available to the community as impact investments. That's, comparatively, 1/20th of our assets are grants, and then we're bringing another 19/20th of our total assets, 95% of our assets, to the table to be available to the community. So I promised an example. Central Ohio Youth for Christ is an organization here in Central Ohio, as the main state, specifically in a neighborhood called Franklinton. It's particularly disadvantaged. They had a building that they owned, but it was sort of falling apart, not in good shape. It wasn't really used prior to this project. But they acquired the building, and they needed an additional $3 million to renovate that new building. So what did they do? Well, of course, like you would probably do, they approached their local bank, and they said, hey, local bank, we need $3 million to renovate this building. Would you consider a loan with the building as collateral? Well, the bank was a little bit unsure, because in a neighborhood like Franklinton, renovating a building doesn't necessarily mean that people are willing to pay more for that building. A lot of people may not be willing to move to Franklinton just because of the challenges of that neighborhood. So it's actually pretty common in that neighborhood for somebody to put a lot of money into a building, and then at the end of the day, nobody's willing to pay more to live there because of the area, and so the value of that building remains unchanged. And that's what they felt like in this case. They said, you know, you could put $3 million into that building, but it might still only be worth $1.5 million. So the most we're going to give you is half of the $3 million that you need. And that was done with a loan at 5%. So it's a very traditional source of funding, traditional loan. So Central Ohio Youth for Christ, then, of course, they had a problem. Well, gosh, you know, we need to raise $3 million. The bank will give us 1.5. We still need another $1.5 million. And this particular project was a little bit time sensitive, so they didn't have the time to you know, run a capital campaign over the next 18 to 24 months to raise the remainder. So they started to talk to their board. Well, one of their board members happens to be part of the Durrell Foundation, and this is the very first time the foundation has ever done an impact investment. But as a board member, just like our first investment with Easter Seals, this individual felt compelled to do something a little bit different, a little bit creative, and ended up providing a $750,000 loan at 5% interest, because they said, you know, we're just selling a bond that pays us 5%, so we still need to make 5%, or else our endowment model doesn't work. But we're willing to loan the same $750,000 at the same interest rate as the bank, knowing that the bank has all of the collateral and we're completely exposed and at risk if this project fails. But not only did they do that, they also went to the Columbus Foundation and they said, you know, Columbus Foundation, would you consider matching our $750,000 loan? And the Columbus Foundation said, sure. So the two foundations partnered together to provide the other half of this project. The Columbus Foundation treated this as a program-related investment. Remember that term I provided earlier? It's abbreviated PRI very commonly in the foundation world. And that means that that loan has to be at below market rate of interest. Well, market rate in this case from the bank is set at 5%. Durrell Foundation came in at market rate of 5% as well. 2% is certainly lower and below market rate. So the total project was able to move forward in a relatively short period of time because both foundations came in and played a unique role, providing loan dollars at a very, very high risk, you know, uncollateralized, exposed position, primarily because they knew that Central Ohio Youth for Christ was going to do some really good and impactful work in this facility once it was renovated, and the social impact is what they used to justify taking a higher risk investment than they ordinarily would. Of course, the other benefit to Central Ohio Youth for Christ is they get a blended interest rate. So now, while the bank gave them 5%, after bringing impact investors to the table, their total cost to borrow was actually reduced to about 4.25%. So particularly from the Columbus Foundation coming in at 2%, they actually saved some money through this project as well. So it just shows different types of investors working together to help move a project forward. Impact investing benefits foundations in a lot of ways. It allows us to recycle the same dollars. So rather than just giving a grant to an organization and that organization using those dollars for programming, in that case, we never get those dollars back, right? If we loan an organization money, maybe as a line of credit to help it manage cash flow through a rough time or when they're waiting on a contract payment or something like that, they can then pay that money back, and when they give us those grant dollars back, or we pay that investment, we can then reinvest that to help other nonprofits. And so we can use the same dollars through impact investing to create much, much more social impact in the community as opposed to grants. It obviously aligns the foundation's assets with its mission more fully, and it also develops a more intimate relationship with grantees. So if you think about a typical loan, if anybody has a mortgage or a car loan, how does it work? Well, typically you just kind of passively make your payments, right? At the end of every month, you write a check, you do your auto transfer, and you don't really think much about a relationship in that context. It's really a transactional relationship. Same thing with grants. You know, it's no secret to the foundations that typically somebody talks to us and, you know, maybe we get a cup of coffee, we talk about your idea, we issue the grant, and then we don't see you again for 12 months until you maybe come back and tell us how the money was spent, how did it go, and make another request, right? With impact investing, we're talking to you on a monthly and a quarterly basis because ultimately we gave you those dollars and we made that loan because we knew that it would create social value for the community. You know, just like you, foundations have missions, and if we loan you dollars for a particular project and that project isn't successful, neither one of us achieved our mission. So we have a much more deeply rooted partnership through impact investing, where not only are we interested, of course, in the financial success of a project, but we really are motivated by the impact piece. And if the project is struggling for some reason, the foundation as an investment partner is much more likely than a bank to bring additional resources, our network, experts, our own experience to the table to roll up our sleeves and help the project be successful. So there you see the fourth one, bringing more tools to the table. In many cases, we're able to consider factors a traditional lender wouldn't. You know, most nonprofits are in donated, you know, leased space with donated equipment and are primarily funded through contributed support. Well, a bank looks at all three of those things very negatively. But a foundation, because we're in this sector, we understand how it works a little bit better. And we know that if your annual fundraiser has been raising $300,000 every year, it's probably going to keep raising $300,000 into the future. You know, looking at your board and their commitment and their history of giving to an organization, all those things are uniquely considered by foundation impact investors, which means that there's many instances where we can finance something and invest in a project when a traditional investor would never be able to, because they don't put a value on the social impact. How does impact investing benefit you? Well, of course, like I said, if you're unbankable, the challenge is usually that you have no credit history. So we've worked with nonprofits in the past who said, you know, we just cannot get a line of credit from the bank. We just need something small because we have contract income, or, you know, we're waiting on the United Way check, and we just need a little bit of money to get us through so we can make payroll. And then when that United Way check comes in, we'll be able to pay back the loan and keep the proceeds for our programs. That's a great situation to partner with a foundation to offer you maybe a smaller line of credit, because that smaller line of credit builds credit history. And the more you build credit history with the foundation, the more likely it is that after a couple iterations of that, you can go to the bank and they will offer you a line of credit. You know, the mission-aligned financing makes us a much more aligned partner and investor for a project, as I explained earlier. It can sharpen fiscal management practices. So as we're going through due diligence and we're whether or not making a loan to a nonprofit is a good idea, we're going to, you know, ask questions about the financial health of the organization, the vision of the organization, your strategic plan. You know, we want to get to know you and understand how you manage the organization so that we can monitor the investment once it's made. That process oftentimes results in questions that end up sharpening the practices of the management team at that organization. And interestingly, we found that after, you know, making a loan to a nonprofit, there may be certain information that we ask for on a monthly or quarterly or yearly basis, and they end up running those reports long after the loan is repaid, because it's just a different approach to thinking about the organization. So it helps them, you know, build a little bit of management, additional management skills as well. And then the last one, it allows board members to consider new strategic initiatives, especially things that are time sensitive and opportunistic. If you have the time to fundraise and do a big capital campaign, that's free money, right? You don't have to repay that. So there's of course no problem with that, and we always encourage organizations to do that if they can. But where fundraising isn't an option and time is sensitive, If a board understands impact investing as a tool in the toolkit, then we can actually help a project move forward and help you take advantage of something that you might not otherwise be able to take advantage of. And I have a great example of that later in the presentation. So I want to share a few examples of impact investing. I keep using the term loan, but it doesn't have to take the form of a loan. That's just something that most people are familiar with and comfortable with. So I want to kind of expand your thinking a little bit with some maybe atypical examples. The first one, charitable use assets. So if you think about a foundation's balance sheet, it may just be composed of cash and bank accounts, investments, things like that. There also might be some real assets. Sometimes foundations invest in real estate, for example. One example is the Tommy Evans Foundation in Newark, Ohio. They believe that every nonprofit should have a home. And how they kind of act on that mission is, rather than providing grants to the community, they actually buy real estate and then they lease that real estate to a nonprofit for $1 a year plus the maintenance. So as an example, if a nonprofit goes to the Tommy Evans Foundation and says, hey, Tommy Evans, we do this great work. The problem is we outgrew our old space and we really need like 4,000 or 5,000 square feet. The Tommy Evans Foundation will look around the community, find a building with that kind of square footage, and they'll actually buy that building on your behalf and then lease it to you for $1 a year. If it needs a new roof, the air conditioner breaks, needs a new coat of paint, that's up to the nonprofit to maintain, but they save a lot of money overall by not having to pay that rent. So there's a very creative way to partner with the foundation to get the space that you need to solve that problem, but it's not a loan and it's not a grant. It's something unique and in between. If you actually get a chance to go to Newark, or maybe you're from Newark, the Tommy Evans Foundation owns all the bike paths, all the firehouses, all the schools, a lot of nonprofit real estate, the farmers markets that they may have just finished, but they were working on earlier this year. They have a tremendous amount of real estate, and they've grown from a $3 million foundation to a $35 million foundation with an additional $15,000 cash. So $35 million is actually their real estate holdings now. So this model allowed the foundation to grow very, very large, and more importantly, the larger they grow, the more nonprofits the foundation is able to house for that lower cost. Another creative example that may be a little bit similar is the Hutton Parker Foundation. So these guys are actually from California, and if you look them up, the founder actually wrote a book called The $100 Million Foundation, and it's all about this model. And he says, I'm a real estate guy. That's how I made my money. I understand real estate. Rather than issuing grants to nonprofits, what I would do is I would go around and I would buy up a building that I thought was a good real estate investment, and then I would go recruit nonprofits. And I would say, hey, would you guys be my tenant? And of course, as a nonprofit, what would you do? You'd say, well, I'm perfectly happy where I am. If I'm going to pay you rent, why would I move to pay you rent versus just staying where I am? And he said, well, if you move to my building, I'll give you partial ownership of the building so that we'll be co-owners of it. So you keep paying rent like you normally would, but in a few years, we'll sell this building together, and if you own 10 or 20% of the building, then you get 10 or 20% of the proceeds of that sale. And that's how you kind of recoup your real estate, your leasing fees, your rent, and hopefully make more money too, so that we're really in this together as partners. They recently sold a building for $6.7 million that was shared between the foundation and a number of different nonprofits. So again, really cool model where the foundation invests with the nonprofit, allowing the foundation to grow much, much larger over the course of the last 20 or 30 years and expand the impact of both the foundation and by saving the nonprofits money, they have more dollars that they can put into their missions as well. So this is a really exciting example of an investment that we, the Wells Foundation, made last year. This highlights probably better than anything else the value of impact investing when it comes to a time-sensitive project. So the PATH Foundation is I don't want to say a smaller nonprofit. They're about a $3 million operating budget, maybe 20 staff here in Columbus. But their mission is to help develop STEM curriculum and STEM learning labs for school districts all across the country. So really, Columbus is just their hub, and then their staff hop on planes and they'll fly to cities across the country, such as maybe Detroit. Then, rather than just building examples, they actually have anthropology background, and they'll start by studying the people. So they might go to Detroit and say, oh my gosh, wow, all of the parents work for the auto industry, and the kids really have an interest in cars and engines and NASCAR and stuff like that. If we were able to build STEM curriculum and learning labs that used automotive examples, the kids would maybe be more engaged. And at night at the dinner table, when mom and dad say, so Tim, what did you learn today? Tim's going to say, oh, you know what, I actually learned about cars and this and that, rather than just saying nothing. So it's a really successful, engaging education model. Unfortunately, though, in Columbus, all they have is an administrative office. So the executive director, Elise Corbin, approached the Wells Foundation and said, here's our problem. We do a really, really good job, and every customer that we have is very, very, successful and happy about the work that we've done. But if you can, imagine that we were a home builder instead. Well, every home builder has their own model home that they walk customers through, and in our case, it could be donors and corporate sponsors and other nonprofit partners. Unfortunately, we just have an administrative office in Columbus. We don't actually have a model home. We don't have our own learning labs that we can show to people. We really need that if we're going to continue to grow as an organization. What we'd like to do is, we already talked to Metro High School, which is a STEM high school in Central Ohio with a very good reputation, 5 different schools across the city. Each one has its own learning lab. So one's robotics, one's agriculture, one's related to the human body and health. So these 5 different locations, 5 separate learning labs, and really no cross-pollination. So whatever learning lab is at the particular location, that's the only one that those students really have access to. PATH Foundation reached out to Metro High School and said, hey, listen, we think we have a partnership here. We really need a facility that we can call our own to be our model home. And you have sort of an inefficient structure with these labs. If we were to buy the warehouse, a 32,000 square foot warehouse behind our administration office, would you consider renting that space from us and consolidating all 5 of your learning labs into one location? That way the students in the robotics lab could work together on projects with bodies or agriculture, and they could design a robot, for example, that might solve that particular problem. Wouldn't that be cool? Of course, Metro High School said, yeah, but we're in an academic school year, so to move this project forward, if you're going to do it, we got to do this within the next 6 months. So PATH Foundation said, great, partnership opportunity, but short timeline. We don't have time for a capital campaign if we're going to take advantage of this opportunity. So fundraising is out of the window already. They went to the bank, and the bank said, well, we'll give you a mortgage to buy the warehouse, but again, we're uncomfortable giving you any money to renovate that building, so you're going to have to find somebody else. Well, luckily, the PATH Foundation worked with a consultant that happens to know about impact investing. So she introduced us, and they said, Wells Foundation, would you be interested in providing the money to renovate this facility? Long story short, we were able to provide impact investing to renovate that building. So the total cost of the project was $1.2 million to buy the building, and then $1.8 million to renovate it. We said, it's uncomfortable for us to take an uncollateralized role in this project without knowing that the nonprofit has some skin in the game as well. So we'd like you to put some of your cash reserves into the project. And we know that you're planning to use a capital campaign to repay this. We'd like you to hire a capital campaign consultant because this is your first campaign. And we'd like to see your board contribute to kick off the capital campaign, but also so that their money is in the project before you borrow the money from the foundation. And so what that did is that really aligned us from an investment standpoint, where both of us were invested in the success of this project. That being said, they were very uncomfortable with the idea of investing some of their hard-earned cash reserves that took them the last 5 or 10 years to start to accumulate. They didn't have to put them all in, but even putting a portion of them was a big debate for the board and the senior management team. So at the end of the day, the project was able to move forward. Very, very exciting. Within just a couple of months, they had the attention of corporations. Groups like Scott's Miracle-Gro came in and said, holy cow, our brand should be all over this agriculture lab. We'll give you $300,000 in contributed support to put our name on that lab. So it was very successful. They attracted some of their very first corporate sponsors, very first donors to the capital campaign. The facility allowed for a whole new level of learning and cross-pollination, and they could walk new customers through that facility who were considering hiring the Path Foundation to build one in their particular city. So here's the punchline, and here's the real value of social impact investing. So not only was there social impact, and not only did it help the organization raise a lot of money, they went from all earned income to really having a fundraising and a philanthropy presence and relationships with corporations. But 6 months after making the loan, which had at least a 3-year timeline on it, we got a call from the Path Foundation and said, hey, how much do we owe you? We'd like to pay you back. We said, really, in full? They said, yeah. We said, how are you able to pay us back so quickly? And what they did is they reappraised the building, and after putting $3 million into the project, the building had an appraised value of $4.1 million. So in less than about 6 months, after all of this work and partnership together with impact investing, they were able to repay our investment in full. They were able to recoup their cash reserves that they had invested in the project, and they benefited with over $1 million in appreciated value on that building. None of it would have been possible if they were limiting themselves to just fundraising, or even fundraising plus traditional loans from a bank. So I love that example because it shows a great balance of impact investing and the social impact that can be achieved, where impact investing really plays a unique role to help the project move forward. So there you can see the architectural design of the space. It's a really, really innovative, feels futuristic space. Their goal, and they actually have students working on this, is to take the entire building 100% off the grid using solar and recycled water and things like that.
Hey, Patrick, I just want to do a time check. We're at 2:20, so I want to make sure we have time for questions and the opportunity for folks on the call to learn more about this.
Yeah, thank you. So in the interest of time, I'm going to cruise through a couple more things. One, the question of social enterprise usually comes up. A social enterprise is different than a nonprofit in that it's addressing a social need through a sustainable earned income model. So it's selling goods or services, and maybe it's hiring ex-offenders or individuals with cognitive or physical disabilities to do that. Impact investing can also be used to fund social enterprise. A great example is actually out of South Boston. It's an it's called Artists for Humanity. Susan Gordon, pictured there on the far left, actually employs very, very low income high school students to make commissioned art. So there you see a really large installation that they did for their local airport. The students, for all of the artwork that they produce, earn 50% of the proceeds from the sale, and then the other half is used to sustain the programming. Over the last 15 years, they've grown from 0 to $3 million as an organization, and they support a large part of that budget, not all of it, but more than half of it, through that earned income, that social enterprise activity. I want to get to one other example that's pretty quick the Stratford Ecological Center. So some foundations that you speak with may not have ever heard of social impact investing. They may come with a strong bias towards using grant dollars, but maybe they're interested in the concept and they want to support a social enterprise idea. So the Stratford Ecological Center is an environmental nonprofit. They have a strong environmental mission, and they also have a farmer's market. That farmer's market sells other people's honey, and they thought, well, if we had our own honeybee business, the honeybees could pollinate our land and our plants, and we would be able to sell our own honey for a much higher profit that we could use towards our mission then. They approached the Wells Foundation for a total of $7,000 to get into the honeybee business, and were completely averse to taking on any sort of loan. We said, how about a $7,000 loan at 4%? And they said, it's a loan. Our board won't approve it. We can't do that. We said, okay, it's just $7,000. The interest rate doesn't really amount to anything anyway. How about $7,000 at 0%? And they still said no. We said, okay, last option. What if we give you the $7,000 as a grant? Then, as for every jar of honey that you sell, give us a quarter, 25% of whatever you sell it for, to help us recoup our grant dollars. If you're not successful, it's a grant. You keep the money. If you are successful and you can get this business up and running, we'd just like the opportunity to recuperate those grant dollars so that we can help other people start small social enterprises like this. So it's called a recoverable grant. So you can see it kind of illustrates there. It's a grant that is recovered, but only upon success. I am going to move forward to the conclusion here. And the slides can be sent out in the follow-up email tomorrow in case you want to read into some of the next steps that were outlined there. But foundations can be much more than grant makers. I hope if nothing else, I've illustrated that we can be mission-aligned investors. We can provide a lot of advice and support. The Wells Foundation, we regularly read social enterprise business plans and help people think through ideas, whether or not it's even on paper. So, that relationship with the foundation is really, really important. And I would encourage you all to leverage those relationships and build true relationships, not just grant transactional relationships with foundations and other types of funders, because we've got our personal experience. In our case, Tony and Dana, the founders, are successful entrepreneurs. They know what it's like to start a new business. And so it takes a community effort, and we can provide a lot more support than just free money through grants. The second thing, impact investing is really a variation of traditional investing. We've all heard of loans. We've all heard of lines of credit and other things like that. But what we're really doing with impact investing is taking those tools and we're reapplying them in the social sector in an effort to expand the mission and expand the impact of the good work that's being done in the community so we can help more people. And then the last one, social entrepreneurship is this really powerful idea that brings mission together with stability and self-sustainability. Honeybees, clearly the pollination of the ground is mission aligned, but it also helps generate a little bit of money so that they can maintain those grounds as a nonprofit. So I'm very excited to share the Ohio Arts Council Scholarship Fund. During the very beginning of this webinar, Christy shared that I run the Social Impact Investing Executive Education Program at the Wells Foundation. There you can see we've got 3 upcoming course dates. It's a cutting-edge leadership development program that is really designed to help nonprofit leaders think differently. It's a result of a lot of research with tax experts, legal structure experts, and studying a lot of innovative models across the country, that our goal is to enable the executive to go through this program to leverage social impact investing. I shared some examples here today, but there are over a dozen types of impact investing that we review in the program. And there's a lot of ways to structure it and take advantage of social enterprise opportunities. So that program is 3 days. Ordinarily, the class is $2,100 in tuition, but through the Ohio Arts Council Scholarship Fund, they're going to be providing a $1,600 tuition scholarship to 2 individuals in each of our upcoming classes. So the next 3 scheduled class dates through the end of this year are shown there.
Hey Patrick, Patrick, it's Christy. We can't see that slide. Have you? I don't see that. Can you advance maybe?
Are you seeing the previous slide?
No, we got it now. There you go.
Okay, there must be a little connection delay there. So I'll leave this on the screen for a moment as we go to questions, but the key there you see in blue is the application link. Or if you want to download the flyer, our website is down right now, so Christy's going to follow up tomorrow with a PDF attachment copy of the course flyer and the application link. I would highly encourage you to consider attending and taking a look at that flyer. If you are interested, please be sure to apply by Friday, August 12th. So with that, Christy, I want to turn it back to you. I know we're pushing up to the end. I spoke a little bit longer than I had intended, but if there's any questions from the audience that I can answer, I would love to do so now.
Yeah, if you have questions, type those in the question box. I would just say that I thank you, Patrick, for that really thought-provoking overview of social impact investing and social enterprise. There's so much more to learn. I sat through the first day of this executive education program a couple of months ago and was really pretty blown away about the opportunities that exist, and I don't know that arts organizations have the right questions to ask foundations. So that's really the point of this, is to help you have new questions to ask. And obviously we think the program is worth the investment. We think teams of 2 are great, maybe an executive director and a finance person, or executive director and a board chair. So we'd really like to think about a team of 2. We have a question about, can we send a copy of the presentation? And yes, you will get that via email in the next couple of days. Let's see, here's a question, Patrick. Is there any reason that foundations would not want to participate in an impact investing opportunity, do you think?
Yeah,
are they worried about asset protection or that?
Yeah, so usually the barrier to a foundation doing impact investing is having the right knowledge. You know, considering a grant is something that most foundations have the right staff for and are really good at. Going from giving away money to investing and being able to evaluate risk and think differently about it is where a lot of foundations sometimes hit the pause button. That's not the end-all be-all. So I would highly encourage you, if the foundation is starting to, put up those objections, that reach out to me, talk to other foundations. There's a lot of ways around that. For example, if you go to the finance fund or an economic development institution, in Columbus we have one called ECDI, and they've actually positioned themselves to be the outsourced due diligence for a number of foundations that want to consider an impact investment. So, there's a foundation up near Cleveland called the Business of Good Foundation, and they work very hands-on in the community, and as soon as they find somebody in a project that they think might make a good impact investment opportunity, they call up ECDI and they all collaborate on it together so that they make sure they have the right skills, they're able to evaluate the risk a little bit more professionally. So that would be one reason. There's also, but I think it's really a knowledge thing in most cases, or an update to their investment policy. But if there is an objection, again, like, email me. We'd love to work with another foundation and help them through the process of making their first impact investment.
Great. Couple on this line, Patrick, and I was actually interested myself. Is there a list or a place people can go to find out foundations who are interested in this kind of investing? I happened to notice this morning, I heard an ad on NPR for the Kresge Foundation, and they've added social impact investing to their NPR commercial, interestingly enough.
Oh, really?
So Kresge is one, clearly. They're advertising.
Yeah, Kresge is one of the big gorillas in this field. They were part of the creation of a group called Mission Investors Exchange several years ago. That's actually the conference that I went to a little over a month ago. Mission Investors Exchange, their website, is the #1 resource that I would recommend if you're trying to find foundations that have, I would say, a commitment to either doing their first or doing more social impact investing. That being said, so they're the national membership organization for foundations that do impact investing. That being said, like any membership organization, there's a lot of them that aren't part of that membership organization. So the other resource that you can look to is the Foundation Center up in Cleveland. I think they're also in DC with operations. But you can access the Foundation Center's database from a public library for free. And you can do a screen for, and this is the key terminology, PRIs, P as in Patrick, like my name. PRI stands for Program-Related Investment, and MRIs, which are Mission-Related Investment. Those are the two key terms, if you're doing a database search there, that will pull up the data for any foundation in the country that has made an impact investment, and then you can download it into a spreadsheet or something and screen by, sort by where was the investor, was it Kresge from across town, across the country, investing in Columbus, or was it a Columbus foundation investing in Columbus? So you can get a feel for where their geographic spread is as an impact investment foundation. Or you can ask
me. Great. Yeah, great resources. Thanks, Patrick, for sharing that. So we're just at about a couple minutes past 2:30, and we want to honor all of your time. I don't see any more questions coming in right now, but you can track Patrick down or send them through me, and I'll get them to Patrick. One last reminder, if you're interested in the opportunity for the Executive Education Program, you do have to apply online through the Wells Foundation. It will be a competitive process, as those sessions are small. The Wells Foundation keeps them to 10 or 12 people per session, so it will be a competitive process. We are going to review the applications together, OAC staff and Wells Foundation staff. So if you're interested in looking, to learn more, that's an opportunity. So again, thank you all. Thank you, Patrick, again, for really wonderful information and kind of stretching our minds in the last hour. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Watch your email for a follow-up survey and follow-up resources. Have a great day.